Go out and record this meeting to begin. Perfect. So, thank you again for all of you for being here. This is a very, very special event for us, as this will be, I guess, the first joint webinar from our three communities. My name is Kevin Palacios. I'm the chair of the Executive Protection Community at ASIS International. And I'm honored and of course excited to have you all here today. Today we're going to have this joint webinar about streamlining best practices in intelligence and executive protection. We have a very, very knowledgeable group of panelists, and in this case, well, I will start by introducing each of the panelists. Each of the panelists, well, will give us a very interesting or important insight on the event that transpired recently. And by the way, as this is going to be a interactive event, I welcome everyone to put your questions, comments on the chat box here in the Zoom app. So to begin with, today I'd like to introduce you to our first panelist. In this case, we have Janelle Miller. She is a global security crisis management, and event management security specialist with over 20 years of FBI experience in crisis management and counterterrorism. She has been specialized in different aspects of corporate security programs after leaving the agency. And of course, as a former senior executive service leader in the FBI, well, she has a very important insight on the events that happened very recently. Of course, we're very glad to have Janelle here as a representative of the women in security community. So Janelle, if you don't mind, you can start right now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, and good morning or good afternoon, maybe even good evening to some of you out there. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I asked Kevin when I joined the panel that I would, as he went through my background, I am a retired FBI agent and served 22 years with the agency and worked extensively with Secret Service on different events. And so I thought I would just go give an overview of how that looks. I understand that we may have some people that were in the public sector and were former law enforcement, but many of you who are in the private sector like I am now were never in the public sector and never worked with, were never law enforcement. And so I'm just going to give a quick overview of how the Secret Service and the FBI and all the different agencies, state and local, work together on something like this. So the first thing is with this event, it was not a national special security event. So if you understand what an NSSE is, and it's a national special security event that Secret Service owns. They run an NSSE, which is the Super Bowl is an NSSE. And so they have very different ones. When the papal visit came to Philadelphia in 2015, that was an NSSE. Then they have the SEER events, which is 1 through 5. And that depends on the level of security that is needed. So in this, it was neither, from my understanding, it definitely was not an NSSE. And my understanding, it was not a SEER event. So what that means is Secret Service clearly is in charge of protecting Donald Trump and certain executives that were at the event. So how it works is Secret Service is in charge of that type of event, working with the FBI, the local field offices. So in this instance, it was Pittsburgh field office. Secret Service has probably an office there. The FBI certainly does. You have Pennsylvania State Police, and then you have Butler PD. And there probably were other agencies maybe involved, but those are the main ones that would have been involved in this. And so they share operational intelligence. So for example, what the FBI is in charge of is any counterterrorism matters, anything that's coming up with their counterterrorism investigations and or any other national security investigations like counterintelligence. And so they're in charge of that. They're also in charge of crisis management. And they work together on task forces. So it's a working group and they are involved. So Butler PD would have been involved in that, Pennsylvania State Police, Secret Service, obviously, and the FBI, and then maybe any other agencies, any other federal agencies, ATF, DEA. So there may have been other ones there. And so they share the intelligence. They want to make sure that whatever the perimeter is that's set, what, the access control, what does that look like? Any cybersecurity attacks? Obviously, I'll let the other guys that deal with the executive protection and snipers talk about that. But there is a discussion and several meetings beforehand about who's in charge of what, and if the Secret Service hands any part of their protection over to another agency, who's in charge of that. There's operational plans that are put together. And so that's really just the overview of how that works. Communication obviously is a big one, about how are you going to communicate back to the command center. And the command center is, it has different agencies in there, and they are able to share information amongst themselves. And that's how it's supposed to work. Obviously, there were missed communications, and we can discuss overall what that was. But when you have a operations center, that is where everything is supposed to come into. So if a police officer sees something, we say the see something, say something. The see something's the easier part. The say something sometimes is the harder part. In this case, the information needs to flow, but they talk about how they're going to communicate, whether it's through the radios, whether it's through WhatsApp, and how do they get information back to the operations center to make any decisions and quick decisions when needed. And so they do discuss that. They go over everything, and hopefully that was done beforehand, but obviously there was miscommunications. So I just wanted to say to the folks out there, I've worked with Secret Service. They are a great agency to work with. I think that obviously there was missed opportunities here and some clear mistakes that were made. But the overall view is that's how it's supposed to work. And Pennsylvania State Police has a lot of officers. I don't know how big Butler PD was, but it is supposed to be collaborative and working together. So with that, I will hand it back over to Kevin.
Thank you, Janelle. It's very important for us to understand the background of these governmental activities, and of course the importance of understanding the agencies and how they work. Let me first, let me also introduce you to our second panelist of today. In this case, we have Caleb Gilbert. Well, he's a very good friend of mine and a very respected member of the executive protection community. Caleb, right now, he's also the board member of the International Protection Security Board. He has led protection teams for A-list celebrities and global executives in 51 countries and 300 plus US cities, and supervised large-scale event security operations. So as an EP specialist, and of course, with all your knowledge, what could you add to what we have already spoke about? Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kevin. Exciting times, to say the least. Want to clarify, I do not come from a federal background. I'm a student of executive protection, and I've been studying it for the last 24 years. So the events of Butler, for me, provide a plethora of lessons, both visible at this time as well as things that we want to know in the future. Some of the key takeaways, obviously, from the communications perspective, we know that breakdown in communications happen in the field all the time. You look at not just this incident, but other AOPs, other attack on principles in the past, and we see breakdown in communication becomes a common thread. That is something that we can learn from, whether it's a small detail or a large detail, whether it's corporate, whether it's high risk, that, you know, having redundancy in communications, having effective ways to communicate when something transitions from a potential risk to something that is actionable, being able to effectively communicate that, I think is one of the big takeaways. I look forward to the after action from this, but again, knowing what we've seen already, we look at the beyond the perimeter that the Secret Service established, information is still flowing, you know, and so understanding as we bring our protectees into any given environment, we have to understand that, you know, that information that we hold confidential amongst our own details isn't always going to be confidential. And a lot of the lessons that we've learned throughout the last couple of weeks certainly has been by individuals who, you know, wouldn't traditionally be privy to a lot of the information that we're hearing, you know. And so approaching protective operations, whether it's local or global, with that perspective and just understanding the, you know, secondary and tertiary possibilities of information about your principal, information about your operations, even information about our training protocols and the proficiency of individuals on our team. I think that's incredibly important and something that we don't traditionally highlight. We know that mistakes were made in Butler, Pennsylvania, and you know, it's become a political issue. It's become a online, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking issue. And let me tell you, I'm disgusted to see how many people who are professionals have taken the situation and tried to approach it from a bias approach. You know, having, you know, been in situations where bad things happen to good people, we all know, anybody who's been in a situation like that knows that nothing ever goes perfect, right? We say time and time again in a training environment that, you know, when something actually happens on the X, you default to your lowest level of training, right? And so I think that this situation provides an accurate vision for protectors all over the world to understand that, you know, how important it is to rely on our intelligence, how important it is to rely on our partners, but also to know that when things go wrong, you know, you saw people do amazing things in Butler, Pennsylvania, and you saw people do things that could use improvement, right? And so my hope is that we can take and find an objective way to move forward, to learn from it, to grow from it, and as a protective community, become better over time.
Thank you, Caleb. Yes, the security protection community in general has a lot of things to learn out of what transpired, and of course your insight is very, very valuable, and I thank you again for being here. By the way, as an explanation to our viewers right now, we originally had planned to have esteemed Jonathan Wackrow as a panelist, but he had a personal emergency today, and Caleb was very kind on stepping into the plate with very short notice. Thank you again, Caleb, for that. So let me introduce you to our third panelist. In this case, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Peter Morton. Peter is a esteemed member from the operational intelligence community at ASIS. He has a very interesting career, which spanned from serving in the military and then successfully transitioning into the corporate security. With his expertise of having worked with several governmental agencies as a leader on strategies and especially as a intelligence analyst. Peter, what would you bring to this conversation to begin with?
Thank you, Kevin, for for the invite and everybody else on here. I think what I look at when I look at this situation might come from a different perspective. In operational intelligence, we really are trying to figure out ways to help operations and intelligence communicate a little bit better. And I think that's kind of, I'd say if you go back through this incident and look at everything, it kind of comes back to communication, and I'd say leadership failures. Essentially, that's what I see. I spent a lot of time working with almost every agency. My career in the military was really weird. 8 years of it was spent working with different law enforcement agencies, and I was in a lot of talks in the room, watching the interagency cooperation that took place, and I always noticed how much time lapsed based on different personalities, and so a lot of what I do now is try to work with organizations to help them streamline some of those processes so they can react quicker. And I think looking at this, we can sharpshoot, all the people on the ground. I did a lot of time, I was a scout in scout sniper teams and did all this stuff tactically as well. We can look at all the people on the ground and sharpshoot that all day long, which I think is wrong. When it should be looked at, we should be looking at the lessons we can learn from the leadership failures, I would say. And there were definitely some leadership failures. Anybody who's been in a leadership position can identify those fairly quickly when it comes to this incident specifically. And I think going forward, I already did one podcast with a friend who's been a sniper for 25 years. He now teaches out in West Texas, law enforcement, military, all sorts of different people. And we looked at this a different way. We didn't go and say, okay, this is what everybody did wrong. We looked at it and said, okay, what would we have done? How would we have approached this? If you do it that way, first off, you're leaving the people who probably had really not a lot of say-so in the way that they reacted and responded. Everybody's following orders, right? We all know that. And so, but looking at, I'd say, the leadership failures in this is probably where we should probably start, and where you can learn a lot of lessons in order to mitigate some of the potential of this happening again. Everybody's watching this right now. It's very politicized, of course, and political people are looking at things that we normally wouldn't look at and taking those, and somebody didn't put their gun away fast enough. Okay, God forbid somebody had a camera on me when I was under extreme pressure. I'd be pretty embarrassed. When they should be looking at, okay, when it comes to leadership, what were the failures? Because that's where it starts. Why were people second guessing things that they should do? Why didn't people know the SOPs? Why weren't communications flowing? Why was there talk just, relaying information? Those kinds of things which we should be looking at, and the things we can really learn lessons from. But when it comes to this, I look at it every time I'm in the room doing either analysis or managing an intel team. It's typically not the intelligence that's the problem. It's the communication and the acceptance and dissemination of that intelligence through leadership. That typically is where it hinges, and where the processes break down. So that's kind of what I look at when I look at the situation, and kind of where it all starts for me.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, this is the subject, of course, of the whole webinar: how to streamline best practices in intelligence. Yeah, to of course make a joint effort with executive protection activities. Let me introduce you right now also to my colleague Declan Galvin, who is the actual chair of the intelligence operational intelligence community at ASIS. Well, Declan, you will help us, of course, by of course putting a lot of these under a special view, of course, in the operational intelligence. And yeah, please, if you could also help me introducing, of course, ASIS and the communities, especially to those that may not be familiar with them.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate the introduction. Just a bit of an introduction on me. My name's Declan Galvin, and I have the privilege of chairing the operational intelligence community. And I also run a risk advisory firm in Nairobi, Kenya. And we want to open it up for dialogue and questions. But I kind of just wanted to also just highlight the significance of this event and kind of it's the purpose of it, which is obviously we in the United States have a very charged political climate. There's a lot of national anxiety associated with the elections. And there was a pretty major security event, with the assassination attempt of former President Trump, which means that as security professionals, we have the responsibility to understand that and then to roll that into kind of continuous improvement. What's interesting about this event is operational intelligence community felt like this was something that we needed to have. Executive protection community also simultaneously felt like we needed to have this conversation, as well as the women in security community. And so the three different communities have come together, like we mentioned, because we really think that this is an important conversation to have, particularly as security experts. So that's the spirit as which I think we can move into the dialogue portion. For anybody who has questions, you can it would be best, given the number, put your questions in the comment box, and I'll just kind of kick off. And this is a question to all three panelists. So it's important for us to not Monday morning quarterback, as was mentioned earlier of the event, but to derive important meaning and takeaways. Do you think that there are important takeaways in terms of maybe lapses or missed opportunities to integrate intelligence with executive protection? And what would that look like if we were to apply what took place and say, well, how can intelligence integration with EP close future gaps? What would that look like? And I guess I'll go to, just because he's on my screen, I'll go to Peter first for his thoughts on that.
Well, thanks, Declan. When I look at this, I don't see necessarily an issue with the intelligence. Prior to the event, they had intel that Iran had a potential. Am I echoing? Just want to ask you a question. Am I really? Is it bad? Okay.
I can hear you fine. Peter.
Okay. There was a potential threat on Donald Trump's life already from Iran, supposedly. They had actually gone after an individual from Pakistan. His last name was Morton, I believe, and had taken him off the board prior to the event. They had detained him on the 12th, I believe it was. And so intel was working, obviously. They're getting intel in, they're adjusting based off that. But there's a lot of different types of intel when it comes to the situation. You have your strategic stuff and you're kind of looking at everything and looking at different threats online, whatever's going on, but there's also actionable intel. There were many times during the event, it seems that there was an opportunity for the protective intelligence team, which should have been on site, to interview individuals, find out what was going on, and have some actionable intel for the commanders in the talk to make decisions on. And it didn't seem like that happened. There was many times where things were reported prior to the shooting that didn't seem to be actioned quickly enough. Now, whether or not the intel team was operating or not, we likely will never know. I mean, we're still trying to get info on JFK, right? So I don't think that we'll actually know the details of that. Plus, you don't want to share all your tactics with the entire world. But it did appear that there was just some lapses there. There was opportunities. And I think it came down to the communication. What really stands out to me is there was a con-op brief in the morning that people were not at. And we used to have a saying in some of these things, if you're not at the brief, you're not a part of the op. And it seemed like there was a breakdown in the communications process, not the intel process. The intel seems to have been there, but it seems to not have been disseminated properly. That can fall back on the intel team as well. If they're not, checking the way they're supposed to be communicating and going and looking at the different freaks that they're supposed to be on. But if they're not briefed on those freaks, or if they don't know and law enforcement doesn't know, again, it all comes back to leadership failures when it comes to those different types of things. Were they rehearsed? Did they do The radio checks are supposed to be simple things like that. Radio checks. Do we know the process for disseminating this intel when we get it? Is it going to get to the people that it needs to get to fast enough? And that's kind of where I saw a lot of the breakdown, and the things that probably could be improved on is the communication of intelligence, actionable intelligence, in order to make the right decisions quickly. In my view, he should never have gotten on stage with the amount of information they had. He should never have been able to go up on stage with that much information. But it comes down to, I think, the communication of that information, which is an important part of intelligence, like I said, on the ground, tactical level, actionable intelligence. So from my perspective, that's kind of what I see is the most glaring issue. Everything else is kind of secondary to that to me.
Great, thanks for that, Peter. Janelle, I would love to hear your thoughts on the same question.
Sure. And what I would say about, actionable intelligence is, to Pete's point, is how are you communicating it, right? So you have an operational plan when you go into an event like that. And this is for the private sector. Hopefully you're doing operational plans, right? Especially if it's a big one. And who's doing what? How are you communicating back? If there is an active shooter, what happens? If there's this, what happens? Your crisis management plan. And so, and everybody that's, a manager in that needs to understand what their role is and how they're going to communicate. So in this case, it's communicated during an your operational plan, but then you go over your operational plan. The key leaders are in that meeting. So Secret Service, FBI, Butler PD, Pennsylvania State Police, and then any other agency that happened to be involved. They're in that room. How are we going to communicate it? So if there's a cop out there that sees something, what if it's just a civilian that sees something? We saw that civilians saw that. That's actionable intelligence. How are you getting it to the people that can make action happen? And so when you're doing a regular event, this is some of the things you need to talk about. If something were to happen, if there's a breach of your perimeter, who's doing what and how is it communicating back? And so I think those are some of the things when we're looking at events that aren't with the Secret Service, right? Our private events where we have key leaders and key people there that we have executive protection. And so it is, and I will say this, in the private sector, if you are dealing with EPs, right, because you are the head of security and you have an event, you have to, it seems obvious to me, but I think I say this is, you need to meet with EP. They need to know what your crisis management plan is, right? If you're the head of security that's running the event, they need to know what that is. Obviously, I would assume they're going to be doing a walkthrough. You're to do the walkthrough with them and get to know them so that if there is an evacuation, maybe it's an earthquake, it doesn't even have to be an active shooter. Where are they going? Who's going where? Who's directing? And so it's just simple things like that. If there's actionable intelligence, how are you getting it to the EP? How are you getting it to your CEO or president? And so you take that from what we had at Butler. It's the same thing. How is a cop getting information from the civilian saying, I think there's something going on? How is that cop getting it to somebody else to take action? Or maybe it's the cop that takes action. And if it is the cop that's taking action, how are they communicating back that I've just left my post and getting it back to, and who's coming around to take their place? And so it is communication that is key, but it's proactive. It's before it happens, before the event happens, all that goes through. And I'm fairly confident that they had that. Obviously, there were breakdowns, but Secret Service and FBI and Pennsylvania State Police and Butler PD, I don't have any doubt that they had an operational plan and had a communication plan beforehand, and then they talked about it before, and then there's breakdowns, and now they'll have an after action to talk about that.
So Janelle, I want to have a quick follow up before we move to Caleb with the same questions. What is the threshold point in which people need to step in and shut the speech down? And I guess I'm specifically speaking about what we saw with the Trump rally. It's clear that something spooked, security services, and they began to kind of reposition. There were small commotions. at what point, was that enough to kind of shut it down? And we're asking this from a perspective of, for future executive protection missions, when is it time to pull them off the stage? Obviously, it's before the shot is fired, but what's that threshold look like?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and that's some of the things that you need to talk about as far what is that threshold that you're going to do. I don't know what Secret Service's threshold would have been, and how that was communicated back. So just to give a little insight before the rally, Pete talked about the Pakistani that was arrested. There's all kinds of intel. Again, the FBI is in charge of the intel. They're in charge of crisis management and counterterrorism. That was clearly a counterterrorism matter. And so they talk about, is there any, threat to the president that's coming in? And the intel, and again, it's at the operations center. And then they have an intel operations center that is co-located with the operations center. And so you have analysts from Pennsylvania State Police, Butler PD, all of them talking about that. And so Secret Service makes that determination because it's their protectee of what that threshold is. Again, the part that's missing is that communication back so that Secret Service can make a decision on what that looks like. And so any counterterrorism matter that happens, FBI, I mean, they know where the subjects are. Right? That is on lockdown when you have something like that. So it's really about the communication going back to Secret Service so they can make that determination, because it is their determination on that threshold. And that's their determination to tell the rest of the law enforcement that's there that if it reaches this, that's when we're going to do that. But you have to let us know.
Great. That's really helpful. So Caleb, we're hearing from both Peter and Janelle that there was a lot of signs, before the rally took place that was key kind of within what we should have understand kind of the risk profile of that particular event. What are your thoughts on the takeaways in terms of this question around intelligence and operations integration and threshold points? You mentioned that you're a student, and you're clearly more than that. You're clearly an experienced practitioner. What do these threshold points and integration opportunities look like?
Certainly. Well, I mean, the SOPs obviously outline the specific threshold, but let's keep in mind, when you're on stage, when you're in front of 15,000 people, that becomes very subjective. Whether it should or not, we could argue it extensively, but the threshold that it takes to remove your protectee is a subjective decision by whoever's the lead, and I can speak from personal experience, having been in large venues, knowing how awkward it is to go up on stage and brief the principal and say, in the middle of an event, shots have been fired outside the venue. You're safe right now, but if I say go, we're going. And the principal can respect that, but it is incredibly awkward for that to happen. It takes a lot for somebody to go on stage in front of all those people and do that, but it's incredibly important. So I think that's a big takeaway, is communication with the principal is incredibly important. We know that information flowing, obviously in the government, we've seen, 9/11 report, how many times did it talk about information silos and needed to break those down, right? We know that's an issue, but it's not just the government. You get a large protective detail, you're in a large venue, and you're controlling the situation. Even in the private sector, you don't necessarily want to share your information with perimeter security or uniformed or the different divisions, and so I think part of it is trying to maintain that information security that we try to protect our principals with, but understanding who should know and having the fail safes, that structure, like you mentioned, in place to be able to overcome those information silos, to be able to communicate effectively, but have that two-way communication. We know that the Secret Service Protective Intelligence is an amazing organization that does amazing things. We don't have any indications at this point that it was an intel failure from their perspective. We know exactly, the timeline for microanalyzing that there were time gaps, but what we don't know is what communication took place in the ears of the individuals on site, then, you know, human nature, delays in responding to that. I think that explains a lot of the things that happen. But so many lessons that we can learn from it. And I think a big one is identify who your stakeholders are, who the appropriate individual is to communicate. Open up your you know, security window a little bit so that you can have authorized individuals feeding that intel pipeline to people in the field. And I think we'll all benefit from that.
I really like your comment on opening up that, you know, that security window and incorporating appropriate stakeholders. We've got a question in the box. This is from Anthony for Peter. So Pete, what specific tactics and techniques do you recommend in persuading leadership or the VIP to take any high-level actionable intelligence more seriously, or to change their plan or itinerary? So we've all been in situations where the principal knows more than us. You know, they've got far more local knowledge and awareness, and they become obstinate or dismissive. How does that get handled?
I think it's about rapport, and that's hard to do, especially when you're doing a joint operation where you have a lot of new people coming in, and you have people the principal's never met, you know, talking to them, telling them what to do. And so you have to find, I typically don't deal with the principal too much. I deal with their assistants, you know, especially on the professional side, it's executive assistants that I end up dealing with the most. I think Caleb could probably, you know, he probably does the same. Because they trust their executive assistants typically more than they trust me, at least at the beginning. It's the same thing with somebody like the president, like Donald Trump. You're probably not dealing with Donald Trump directly too much. I don't know. I was never in the Secret Service, but I'm just guessing that you're dealing with his staff more than anything. And so you have to find a person that can build rapport quickly, because that's all it takes. It's based on that. They don't know you. You're new. You have to have the kind of personality where they can trust you. You have to have the background, your bona fides and all that other stuff, even though it's maybe not as important to you. And especially when you know that there's no such thing as a professional anymore because things change so fast. But you have to have that person who can build rapport quickly in order to convince them to do what you say. At the same time, and Caleb will attest to this, there's time where you're not asking the principal to do anything. You're grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and dragging them off a stage and throwing them in a car, because you don't have time to explain to them your job and everything that it takes to do that. But when it comes to intel and operations, you have to find that person who can bring those two together. I was fortunate. I did intel and I did operations and I had command time. I had a lot of different things that kind of, so I understand your job. I understand your job and what it takes to do it. I understand the language. But you have to find that one person, that center of gravity, that can bring everybody together, build trust quickly so they listen to what you say, to hopefully avoid a situation in the first place. But a lot of times in this specific situation, you're probably dealing with a bunch of agencies that came together for this event specifically and did not know each other and did not have a lot of time to build rapport. That's why you got to find that one person that can do that for you. That's, in my opinion anyway, that's what I believe.
Excellent. Janelle, just I'm kind of picking a few questions and amalgamating them from the chat box. Donald Trump is no normal politician by any means, right? He doesn't want to be, and he's certainly not kind of considered that. He is a unique and charged political force, you know, within the you know, contemporary U.S. politics. It's just a fact. His rallies, maybe, and I could stand to be corrected, may also, I mean, they're these massive, really dynamic, exciting events. The enthusiasm is, you know, is clear. Do you think that dynamic impacts kind of the risk tolerance of his Secret Service detail, of people who are around him? Do you think that that's something that is problematic? And if you find yourself in a position of protecting a VIP who might be in a similar situation where they're just, you know, their dynamicism is forcing, whether you like it or not, a different risk tolerance, how does that get managed? Particularly in a multi-agency kind of coordination perspective, which you clearly have have a background in. How does somebody deal with that problem?
So Secret Service, when they're looking at whether it's a rally inside, whether it's outside, they've had discussion. So there is somebody assigned, obviously, to Donald Trump, and they talk directly. And so they look at the risk. And people, because I see it in the chat, and I've heard it, why was there an outside rally? Well, it's because Trump wanted one. That doesn't mean Secret Service didn't go to him and say it's super dangerous. And here's some of the threats. But at the end of the day, it's up to Secret Service to protect him. And Donald Trump has the right, as does President Biden and any of the higher ups, to say, I'm going to have this rally. It's kind of like when you're telling your CEO, like, hey, this is really dangerous. At the end of the day, he or she can say, well, we're going ahead anyway. And then it's security's job to make sure that threat, if they have to bring more people in, whatever it is, to make sure that everybody, is safe. That includes, obviously, the civilians that are at those rallies. So I have no doubt that there has been major discussions, and it went all the way up to the Director of Secret Service, then up to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to talk about, these rallies. But at the end of the day, it is Donald Trump's decision. Now, we'll say they've actually closed that, right? And Donald Trump is not going to be doing outside rallies anymore, from at least what I heard. Unfortunately, sometimes it's reactive, and then he realizes, oh, I really shouldn't be outside doing that. And so I have no doubt, because I have worked with Secret Service, that they probably told him how serious it is, the risk tolerance for having it outside. But at the end of the day, they have to go forward. That's why you'll never see a DNC or an RNC outside, right? It's going to be contained in a building. And so because of the high politicalization of those and the threats to them. And there's all kinds of, I work the RNC and DNC. There's all kinds of threats that come in, and it's a constant flow of information. And so when there's threats, so obviously high risk when you have an open thing like that, but a high risk could be also in a contained building. And so the threats that come in, this is where that comes back to the Intelligence Operations Center, even beforehand. I mean, you're talking, it should be, a week out. Like, what types of threat? We know that Donald Trump is going to have this event. What types of threats are coming in, and who's handling it? Well, it comes into the Operations Center, and, they work through those threats and to make sure that, they are handled appropriately.
Great. I want to ask one last question, and it's kind of taken a little bit from what I'm seeing in the chat box, but it's very much, again, animated by what we were talking about at the outset of the purpose of this event, which is to bring in intelligence, executive protection, and the women in leadership, the women in security leadership community, because the reality is, in the immediate and continued aftermath of this attempted assassination, a lot of people have taken a gendered approach to what transpired. It's clear that the head of the Secret Service was female. There were females on Trump's security detail, and I think that because it's clear that ASIS promotes diversity and inclusion. I think that it's an established fact. Diverse teams are stronger teams, and yet we continue to see prejudice, in this case, sexism. I want to read something, and I'm not saying that this is totally accurate. It's somebody, Jim Wooten. I'm sure he posted it verbatim, but I'll just read this, and then I'd like to get everybody's kind of response. In trying to understand how we can continue to promote inclusion and equities within the security space. So Jim posted from Newsmax this morning, a quote, "A female security agent on duty to protect former President Donald Trump at a North Carolina rally on Wednesday left her post to breastfeed without permission. Real Clear Politics reported, quote, the woman agent out of the Atlanta field office and two family members bypassed the uniform division checkpoint and were escorted by, quote, unpinned event staff in the room to breastfeed, sources said. As an intelligence professional, as somebody who reads reports, it's clear that there's an angle to this particular piece. Whether there's truth or not, I'm not going to even try to ascertain this. But this is the kind of discourse that we're increasingly seeing in the aftermath. So what do we need to do as security professionals? And Caleb, I'm going to punt that one to you, but I'm interested in everybody's thoughts, including people attending in the chat box. Thank you.
Well, let me just start out by saying that the mistakes that were made in Butler, Pennsylvania were not gender specific. And anybody can allocate blame if they want. But at the end of the day, I'm not interested in blaming. I'm interested in learning, right? And I think as an industry, the more we learn about ways that we can facilitate the success of the protectors on the ground, the more productive conversation we're going to have. Now, coming from my perspective in the private sector, for the last 14 years, I've had incredibly diverse teams with some amazing human beings, gender, job-specific roles that I've had females that have been absolute rock stars. I've had males that have been absolute rock stars. But let me tell you, it is for my teams, the success of my teams have relied on the fact that we have females working in protective roles. We have individuals, males, who have come from different backgrounds and able to come together and focus on protection. Now, it's been disgusting to see the attacks because, the attacks are largely ignorant, but you're going to sit here and say that somehow the female should have been able to protect a 6 foot, above 6 foot protectee effectively when most males aren't as tall as Donald Trump either. So not only is that baseless, I hate to even focus on it, but I have to say, like, protective operations techniques work regardless of your size, regardless of your gender. Let's focus on competence. Let's focus on training. Let's focus on lessons learned. Let's focus on ways to get better, And I personally know of one female who has had 3 real world attacks on principals, incidents where an attacker was trying to actively kill her protectee. This is in Silicon Valley. This isn't Sandbox, but 3 verified attacks on principals that were all mitigated by one female. I would venture to say that most males in this industry haven't had 3 verified attacks on principal, regardless of who it is or what they were doing, the results were proven to be effective because it's good people doing good things, using their training, using their intelligence, and using their intuition to safeguard the people we've been entrusted to protect.
Great, really good use case as well. Peter, your thoughts on this discussion?
Yeah, I agree with Caleb on this. It's it's almost infantile and silly, some of the comments that come out about that, and they're just cherry picking, based off, it's a woman, let's focus on her mistakes. So in what I do a lot of like travel risk stuff and everything else, and it came kind of really clear to me. First off, when we started in the military, they started letting women join the infantry. And there was a lot of uproar about that, of course, and everybody's freaking out. To me, it was just the standards here, maintain the standard. People who are qualified do the job. When I was in Ukraine for like 6 months. All of the men were conscripted. So I had some people from the outside, but anybody local that I needed to use were females. And we had some of the best operations I've had in my time doing this in over 25 years. I don't think that we should be focused on that as much as right people for the job. As long as they're meeting the standard, they're getting the training, they're doing the training right, and they're passing the test, there should be no question. Okay. And obviously with the Secret Service, they have a standard to maintain because life and death is very black and white. You can't adjust based off of, there's no actualization up here thinking, I wish I could do this. It's either you can do it or you can't. The people that were put there obviously were put there for a reason because they were qualified to do so. And like I said, I would like to see everybody that likes to do their cool little training videos, where they're all doing the proper movements and they look all tactical like John Wick or whatever. Okay. I want to see cameras of people, and I've seen it in combat numerous times. I spent my entire career at combat. People, I've done it myself under pressure, missing my magazine well. You know, you practice as much as you can, but guess what? When that stress is on, anybody can have a failure. Okay, so for them to point that out and say that's the problem, or they're not tall enough, that's the other thing, like Caleb was saying. It's like, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Okay, so I think we should focus on standards, meeting the standards. You pass the standards, you're qualified to do the job. You respect that person, their ability to do the job, and you don't even need to look at their gender. Okay, it's just silly. That's my opinion.
Great, and good example from Ukraine. So Janelle, what are your thoughts?
Yes, as the woman in security, and spent 22 years of my life in the FBI and made it to senior executive. Here's what I'll say about the DEI. Shame on the politicians and shame on everybody that commented on the female FBI agent or female Secret Service agents. Shame on them. Because they're out there risking their lives every day. And the people that comment on that are sitting on their sofa working from home. So the one thing I'll say about female leaders, and I've worked obviously in the industry, there's not one female leader that I know, and I'm included in this, that wants to get hired because I'm a female. We want to get hired because we're the best, and then we're female. Because you have to have diversity, but you also have to have good leadership. You also have to have the skill set, just like a man does. And so there's not one female that I know that wants to get hired because they're a female. That is irrelevant. It's because you are the best at your job. And every female Secret Service agent that is out there, they are the ones that are risking their lives every day. And there's not one time that they think, well, I'm a female, I can't do this. They are risking their lives, just like law enforcement. Think about a cop, right? And they're out there. They have female cops. I was a female cop. Obviously, I'm female, but I was law enforcement. I was Baltimore PD. And the fact of the matter is it is collaboration with your male counterparts. The old school used to be, well, we're one of the guys. I still say that. Who cares? It's not about gender. It is about how you bring yourself to work every day and work together as a team. Because at the end of it, you are a team that had to get Donald Trump to safety. Mm-hmm. And there's those male agents that were up there didn't care that there was a female agent up there whisking Donald Trump away. Mm-hmm. So for those people, and that includes politicians that said that was a DEI hire for the Secret Service director. The Secret Service director, when she's up there in front of Congress discussing, it's not if she didn't answer questions, it's not because she was a female. It's her leadership style. It's her being a leader. So I hope that from my perspective and the women in security that are out there, we are going to have to deal with this continuously. It's 2024, and I'm not shocked that happened, but it's shameful, and we need to do better. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Kevin, how are we on time? Should we continue to take some questions, or should we kind of allow?
Thank you. Well, so we have time for another round of questions that could be addressed. We have about 15 more minutes before we start with the final declarations. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'd like to incorporate training into this. I saw there was a question targeted to Caleb around certifications. What kind of certifications around these discussions do you? Obviously, you're not endorsing anything specific, I think, but like what is out there that you think is a value add?
To be perfectly honest, I think the answer to this, best answer I can give from private sector perspective, is your training needs to be a direct reflection of where you want to go. When I started in the industry, I was a nobody from nowhere, and I had zero training. So it was a clean, blank canvas to start with. I spent $43,000 on security-specific training before anybody invested any training in me. And I spent well over $300,000 of my own money over the last 24 years trying to become the professional that I want to be. So I think that there's so many amazing programs out there. ASIS has all the certifications, the CPC, that I'm working through right now. But I think that it is important, especially in the private sector, to develop a plan for where you want to go. I love having a structured approach to being able to become the professional that you want to be. And for me, yeah, it was 2010 when I decided that I wanted to achieve a certain level of leadership, by the time that I was 50, and so I developed a several decade plan, went through Stanford, went through Johns Hopkins master's programs. And for me, it was a specific program that would allow me to go where I wanted to go. I think for each individual that's different, but the process of developing a plan and doing your research on the schools, take a look at, if you want to go to an executive protection school, who are the individuals behind it? How much operational experience do they have? When was the last time they were in the field, when the instructors were in the field? There's so many online forums that offer a plethora of information in context to be able to understand it. The other thing is there's so many great organizations out there that are able to focus on, different directions and learning seminars and seminars. And let me say, I love attending seminars because it gives, early in my career, that's what gave me the opportunity to see my heroes in the executive protection community face to face, and to be able to start to develop my plan, get their context on, what training's effective. We know that there's several different slices of the industry. I didn't know that early on. I started out in the celebrity sector, but I didn't know about corporate. I didn't know about high risk. I knew that, government was an option because I didn't have my degree at the time, but I followed a structured progression to be able to work with the Fortune 500 companies and the different, details that I've been privileged to be a part of. So definitely think that networking and learning about the potential for training programs is incredibly important for everyone, regardless of your level of experience in the industry.
Excellent. Pete, I'll ask you a question just in terms of your outlook for what's transpiring. I think in the immediate aftermath of the attempted assassination on Trump, there was immediate concern that this was going to escalate tension, and that there could be anticipatory attacks at rallies or against perceived kind of political opponents. There could be retaliatory attacks against perceived, opponents. And then the question of, do we have the right kind of preparedness in place to be able to manage, the forecasted or the alleged increase in these risks? What's your thought on the current environment as we move into the conventions and then the general election campaigning and the November election?
Well, anybody who's been in security for any amount of time, I know we discussed this earlier, knows the best time to go pitch an idea to somebody or try and retain a new customer is after an incident. That's the honest to God truth. It's not before. So of course, now after an incident's taken place, everybody's really, they're watching, right? Their heads on a swivel. And so, but what I think is, when it comes to this incident specifically, for me, this is more of a target of opportunity than actually something that was really planned out. The kid bought a ladder that morning. He went to the event, scoped it out, then went and bought ammo the same day that he did the shooting. It was like, hey, there's vulnerabilities here that I could take advantage of. And he took advantage of the vulnerabilities. I think as long as Secret Service, which they've obviously upped their game, and Donald Trump's team's listening, I think as long as they're doing that and they have the appropriate mitigation in place, that they'll be able to mitigate something like this. At the same time, it has portrayed, unfortunately, a huge threat vulnerability, a weakness, to a lot of people who are potential actors out there looking for the opportunity. I know, like Iran has over and over again threatened Donald Trump because of Soleimani when he took out that target. So they may be looking at this like, there's vulnerabilities available now. Let's look at and try and do this again. As far as like just regular threat actors out there, like I said, I think as long as they're on their game now and they're mitigating those vulnerabilities, I think they'll be able to stop them. But at the same time, there's always, that's the odd thing about this is like I said, we're all practitioners. We're not experts because there's so many new ways of doing things. It's like, you never know what's going to happen. And that's why it's hard to sharpshoot somebody after the fact. It's like, you don't know, you're doing your best. You got to be agile to adjust to the situation as much as possible when it happens. But I see a couple of different things. Like I said, the potential for other actors, everything comes in threes, they say, right? Because of copycat crime. So there's probably some ideas that have been put in other people's heads based off this, but as long as people have fixed the problems, right, mitigated the risk, that I think they'll be okay. And going forward into the election, we also need to look at, we can't get so focused on, we all have bias, right? I would say I'm biased toward the military. I'm going to say that Janelle may be biased toward law enforcement and defend them a little bit more, and Caleb on the professional sector. One of the things they need to really look at is what was their political bias involved in the decisions leading up to this event, and taking care of that. I've seen that over and over again more recently in the intel community, where people's bias is influencing their analysis. And we need to get back to, hey, I think this way, I need to find somebody with the exact opposite viewpoint. If I'm right, I need to find somebody on the left to look at my analysis. We need to come together on the things we agree on and push that forward. And I think that's something they need to look at with this situation. If they want to find out, go back over the last 2 years of details, look at Donald Trump's level of security commensurate with, Clinton and Bush or something like that. Do the analysis to figure out if that was the case. But I don't think it's very wise for anybody in security to not think that that could happen, because it happens all over the world in governments all the time. And so we need to look at our own as well and make sure that that's not happening, and it's not going to continue to perpetuate the failures that we saw in this last one.
Great, thanks. So I think we've kind of reached the end. Janelle, if you would just kind of give us your parting shots as we kind of round up the event.
Sure. I think it's wise for me to comment on did things happen because it was Donald Trump from a law enforcement perspective? No. I know Secret Service agents. I don't specifically know them. I don't believe at all that any of them would ever want something like that to happen. And because they're putting on front stage, right? Now we all know who those protectees are and what they look like. And so from an operational intelligence perspective, the FBI has obviously, you have the intel services, CIA, NSA, and you got to get the information to the right people to make decisions. But when you're talking about the street agents on the ground doing the protection, they have true hearts, and they don't care whether it was Donald Trump or President Biden. Their job is to protect. And I truly believe that none of that failure was because of political bias. And that's to include the leadership failures.
Great. Caleb.
I think one of my most salient takeaways from this is the importance of having a dynamic risk-based coverage plan. We see it time and time again. We talk about risk-based executive protection operations, but in this situation, we know that even just watching the protective posture around, former President Trump, his protective posture was reduced from what we've seen in the past. Now, whatever led to that, I don't say it for any political reason. I say it to illustrate the need to have a dynamic program, right? Have an intel-fed program that can expand and contract based on the risk. One of the things that we've struggled with for decades, with the relationship between intel and field operations and protective side of the house, is realistically what is important to intel isn't always important to the people in the field. And so finding an effective conduit to be able to communicate the information, the intelligence that's actionable or that's relevant to that specific protective operation is incredibly important. And then for the EP agents in the field, understanding what is relevant intelligence, what is relevant information that we can use. Because let's face it, most people that go into EP aren't familiar with what it takes to develop a risk assessment or develop, a comprehensive intel product. And so having that cross training is something what I've done. Thankfully, I've had the benefit of managing large teams, that we had that cross pollination between the different teams. But it's incredibly important, because otherwise you have your EP team who's out in the field ignoring what Intel provides, and you have the Intel team on the back of the house providing massive amounts of product that may not be important to whoever the decision maker in the field is. So understanding that, for me, was a significant milestone in being able to fuse the two together. Obviously, we're talking about Intel EP and women in security here. So, I want to touch on my women in security. Incredibly important to have a purpose-built team. I look at it as constructive conflict of thought, constructive conflict of background. I want every background from every team, especially when I'm building my large teams, because everyone has high points and low points, regardless of gender, regardless of background. And being able to come together, put a collaborative effort into providing the best level of protection for our principals possible, that's important. That's how we keep our protectees safe, and that's how we create a better security posture for tomorrow.
Great. And final remarks from you, Peter.
Yeah, I want to caveat what I said, just to make sure everybody knows when I'm talking about bias, political bias, I'm not talking about people on the ground. And I am talking about the individuals who are doing a lot of the analysis and things like that. And it's something I used to be the one reading all the reports and then pushing them forward to the senior leaders. And I would always find that no matter what you do in a report, you find it. And so, in other words, in order to make sure that information is as clear, it's about the protection of the individual or the event, and it's about mitigating the threats and the risk. I think it's important that we make sure that our analysts, first off, are trained properly in critical thinking, which is important. It's something that's been overlooked for many years. It's starting to be focused on a little bit more now, but it's been difficult. So critical thinking is very important, making sure the analysts understand. It's about the life and death of an individual. The other big thing is communicating it to somebody properly. I get some really cool reports, like dissertations. They're great. I'm like, okay, and I'll shrink that down to one page that I can hand to the principal because they're not going to read it. Making sure it's clear, concise, and that they can understand it and take away the things they need to mitigate the risk. Because that's all you're doing as an intel person. You're providing information for them to make decisions, decision points, and mitigate risk to the principal. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that properly and communicating it the best way we can. One page. You got to get down to one page, and then I'll read your report, of course, and tell you how awesome it is. I promise. But that's what I like to leave everyone with. Just make sure that you're communicating it properly and being the part of the job that doing the part of the job you're supposed to do.
Excellent.
Well,
so before I kick back to Kevin, I just want, as we kind of wrap up, I'll just kind of do my thanks for everybody, both people who attended. We had great turnout today. Definitely for our panelists who are lending their expertise and really incredible insights. Again, I think this is a really important dialogue, and I think that we have a moral responsibility as security professionals to really address these difficult topics and then to continue to improve our security and protection programs. As part of kind of the operational intelligence community's continued dedication to that, we have one of our open calls in September that I wanted to highlight on disinformation. So we've got some really incredible experts who are going to be looking at disinformation and how to combat against that, and how to make sure that you've got the right kinds of protections in your security programs to combat against that. So there'll be more details on that. I just wanted to highlight because I think that this is, of course, part and parcel with that. And then I'll hand it back over to Kevin.
Thank you, Declan. Well, thank you, Peter, Janelle, Caleb. Well, this has been a very, very successful event. Well, we had over 500 attendants that registered, and the peak we had almost 250 at a given time here on the call. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be, of course, shared with the members of ASIS and the different communities. I'd like to request, if possible, if everyone can turn on their cameras. Let's take a photo of the event so we can actually have it posted. If you could, please just turn on your cameras. There you go. A few familiar faces. There you go. Great. And yes, we had in this webinar some really important insights on the industry from the different points of view, of course, from Intel, women's security, and EP. And yes, of course, the solution is for us as a specialist to sort of go out of our silos and welcome these type of joint efforts. Yeah, this will be an example of what can be achieved in your different organizations. And by all means, well, we are always willing to collaborate and to produce events like this. And this will, of course, should be again an example for every single organization, every single community. I would like to finish by inviting you all to the next event. Well, here we go. There will be a Q4 event organized by the Executive Protection Community that is scheduled for the 20th of November. We don't have a topic yet, but please, you can just scan the QR or use the link to register, and you'll be the first to know as soon as we have more information on the actual event. I thank everyone for being here, and again, please let's take all these insights and be safe. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Bye.